I am an 18-year-old male, and this encounter occurred when I was around 13. Every year, when the 4th of July rolls around, me and my family would go to a friend's house to celebrate. The friend and his family are quite wealthy, and they live in a large house about half a mile into the woods. The 4th of July parties at their house were always huge events with around 15 to 20 families attending. The younger people at the parties were either around my age or high school age. I typically hung out with my friend Gavin and his sister Trina, who were the kids of the family friend that owned the house. On this particular 4th of July, the older kids decided they wanted to go out into the woods, and of course all of the younger kids wanted to go too, me included. Keith, one of the older kids, agreed to us tagging along under the condition that we wouldn't chicken out and run away. All of the younger kids agreed, and the whole group journeyed into the woods. Keith was leading us down a trail to a nearby pond when Trina grabbed my hand. 13-year-old me turned beet red in the darkness, but I could also tell something was wrong. "There's someone in the woods. I just saw him. He's a big man." She pointed out into the trees, but I didn't see anything. I squeezed her hand tightly and told her that she was just seeing things. Trina had always been the sort to scare easily, and I thought nothing of it. The group finally made it to the pond. We only had one flashlight with us, but by this time everyone's eyes had adjusted to the darkness of the woods. We all sat around talking and goofing off. We occasionally heard sounds in the woods, but we just figured it was the local deer population. Most of us are children of deer hunters, and the area was near our dad's hunting land. Eventually, everyone settled down, and Keith started telling us a scary story. It was something about kids getting lost in the woods. As the story continued, Trina's grip on my hand got tighter and tighter. She was practically shaking when one of Keith's friends tossed a log into the pond, right at the story's climax. Everyone jumped and screamed, and eventually we all started laughing at how scared we got. Suddenly, another distinct laugh joined ours. It was a deep, throaty chuckle that echoed off the empty space around the pond. We all stopped laughing and sat in silence. I looked around, and my eyes locked onto a large black mass that could only be human standing at the edge of the woods around our pond. "That was a good one. You even startled me," said the mass. The voice sounded similar to the chuckle from before. The air seemed to freeze, and for what seemed like eternity, no one moved. It felt like Trina was trying to shatter the bones in my hand. Suddenly, as if time had started again, we all scrambled up and ran. We ran as fast and as hard as we could, but it didn't seem fast enough. I could hear the heavy footfalls behind our group, heavier than any of us could produce. The man was following us. After what seemed like hours, we all exited the woods and ran into the brightly lit driveway. We watched the edge of the woods while Keith did a head count. Trina swears to this day that she saw the man standing at the edge of the woods watching us before turning back and walking away. This remains one of the scariest experiences in my life. I like to tell myself that the man was just passing by and had no ill intentions, but why did he chase after us? If he was the one who Trina saw on the way to the pond, why did he follow us there? I'll never know his intentions or why he was there. So, I grew up as a middle-class suburban dweeb, middle son in a waspy family in a mostly stable home. Like many such children, I was left to my own devices quite a bit. When the first modem made its way into the house along with AOL, I was hooked on the chat rooms. This was a pretty momentous occasion for me. I was a sexually precocious kid. Before my teens, I was already desperate for sex, despite not knowing what that actually meant. There really wasn't any outlet for that, though, so it mostly meant me spending huge amounts of time alone in my room, thinking abstractly about sex. dry humping pillows, disrobing with my door unlocked or slightly ajar, etc. When chat rooms entered the equation, though, it gave me a wealth of people to talk about sex with, and I was basically addicted. I would lurk in sexually explicit chat rooms for hours on end. After years of being a lurker, casually observing the sexual discourse in chat rooms, I started to participate. Being the internet, it was mostly men. I didn't consider myself gay or bisexual, but I was so sex crazed that any sexual attention was a positive. And there was attention. Some stymied curious boys like myself, but many young adults and older men. I began to have pretty lurid chats, leading to cybersex. This was the days before the proliferation of digital cameras or even scanners, so it was strictly text. This went on for a little while in the generic hookup style chat rooms, and I started to actually get into it. I took a bold step and progressed to the local rooms, which after 10 or so were all a barrage of ASL questions. I live near a major city, so it was always hopping. I'd cyber with anyone who came my way. When they'd inevitably ask for my location, I'd give a suburb 30 or 40 minutes away from where I actually live. Until one day that I remember very clearly. I'd been cybering with one guy in his late teens, only a handful of years older than me, when he asked me where I was. I lied and turned the question to him. He replied that he lived in the suburb that I actually lived in. I confessed to my lie, saying that I'd lied to keep creepers away. He commended me on the clever idea. And so it got to be that I'd cyber with this guy every couple days. He'd ask about phone sex, but I didn't want to have to call from my parents' line. Our cyber sex sessions turned into discussions of what we would do after we meet. He said he knew the perfect place we could play in his car, and asked where a safe spot would be to pick me up. I mentioned a park that was several blocks away. Things continued this way, strictly in the realm of fantasy, for a while. Eventually though, I started to lose my interest. I wouldn't sign in for weeks at a time, then months. Whenever I did, though, he was there, ready to pick right up where we left off. I was usually willing to oblige because what harm can be done? After all, it's just fantasy. Years later, I had all but forgotten the account. We didn't have AOL anymore, and I'd made a new account on AIM. About 5 years after this had started, I was moving into my college dorm and setting up my new laptop, when I remembered my old handle and signed back in. It had been years since I'd last signed in. Sure enough, who IM's me but my old friend? He asks what I'm up to, and I tell him I've moved. Oh, shucks, he replied. We never did meet. Yeah, I said. Bummer. It's a shame that dates didn't work out. What date? I asked. We were gonna meet at the Walgreens on your block, but you chickened out. I replied. Oh, I don't think I remember that, I said, racking my brain to recall such an event. There was, in fact, a Walgreens on my block, but it was a relatively new one. Yeah, dude, he assured me. We were gonna meet in the parking lot, but you drove away before I could talk to you. I assured him that he was mistaken, as I hadn't spoken to him more than a time or two since I got my license. No man, for real, you were gonna meet me there in that black Ford Focus with the bike rack. He also mentioned a different, very unique feature of that car that I'll not mention to not out myself. The room seemed to swim. I felt like I was falling backward. He correctly identified a car I was driving, but I hadn't ever told him about it. I hadn't ever even sent a picture that included my face. I was sure I had never set anything up. Was he deliberately fucking with me, just trying to let me know that he'd found me? Or had the years since this had happened twisted the event in his mind? Had he convinced himself that him stalking me was a meeting we had arranged? I blocked him and tried to forget about it. I wasn't living in the same town anymore, and even though his stalking prowess was apparently good, I was a significant distance away and a pretty athletic guy. If he found me again, I didn't have much to worry about. I had nearly forgotten about this whole thing until the other day. This was over a decade ago at this point. My older brother and I were catching up, lamenting getting older, and I quipped that I knew I was old because a member of my graduating class had already gone to jail for a felony and served his time. This led to a discussion of friends and classmates who had been arrested. He led with, "Remember Charles? I played football with him. He was arrested for sexing up kids he met on the internet. Crazy." I looked up the case. He had been tried and convicted for a slew of sex crimes. He had apparently been using social sites like Xanga, MySpace, Friendster to meet young boys. He had blackmailed and assaulted some of them when they wanted to break it off. The more I read, the more I got a heavy feeling in my stomach. I then googled his AIM handle. It wasn't terribly unique. There were similarly named accounts on all sorts of sites, some of which were definitely not him. But one, deeper in the results, was an account on a rollerblading forum. Skimming this account's post, I was positive it was the same person I'd been chatting with. Clicking to the user profile statistic page, the last login was precisely the day before my brother's friend was arrested. At this point, I have more questions than answers. Could it really have been him? If it was it random chance? Did he know me through my brother? Is that how he was able to put a face to the name? Was he waiting in my neighborhood on purpose? Or was it a coincidence? It happened a few weeks ago. I live in the country, and the bus stop for school is in front of my house. My neighbor came over and we put our kids on the bus. I was drinking coffee and she stayed to smoke and chat on my porch and left. About a minute after she left, I heard her hunting dogs bark. I didn't however think anything of it because of squirrels, etc. They bark at them. Then my neighbor calls me and I hear her voice frantically saying someone was running from her home to mine. I saw him as soon as she said it. One of my pits was outside and tried her best to run after him. She's 9 with very bad hips. My neighbor is running up at this time too. I call the cops. We had been having thefts happening. Diesel, gas, yard equipment, a miniature pony, all stolen. My neighbor headed back to her house to see if anything was stolen in her yard, and I waited outside in my porch for the police. I decided to walk right behind my house to our shed to see if perhaps it had been broken into, thinking surely dude kept running. Wrong. I heard branches breaking and looked towards our woods thinking it was my neighbor's dogs still. Nope, it was him coming straight for me. I then stupidly ran up my back porch to my back door and realized it was locked. I didn't have time to be able to safely run back down it, so I jumped off the top railing. I have patellar tendonitis, which means I have a bad knee, so I was stumbling, running, screaming for my neighbor. She came running with her gun and yelled she was going to shoot. Dude ran. The police came there 20 minutes after I first called. We seriously live in the sticks. Cops don't even have radar here, and that's the country cops. They never caught him to this day. So, guy in my woods who chased after me in my own yard, let's never meet. If we do, I have full permission to shoot or release my younger pit who will definitely cause damage. This gives me cold bumps thinking about it again. The guy's face and body movements while I was yelling at him to leave and go was extremely creepy and disturbing. I never go outside alone anymore without my dog Trulé with me.